tonight, and it is a real honor for us to have, I'm trying to let people in at the same time as I'm talking. That's a mistake. It's wonderful to have you, Pastor Willie, to join us tonight and to share the wisdom from your book. And the Lane Lyceums, Lyceum started many years ago, back in the 19th century, and it was a way for people to come together and share ideas that mattered. And so that's what we have tried to continue with our Lane Lyceums. And so this is the first of our year, and we will continue having a variety of lyceums and hope that people will be interested in those as well. There are many new people tonight, names that I don't know. And if you would like to be on our mailing list, if you could put your emails in the chat, I will record those, and then we can send you notices about the further lyceums. So that would just be absolutely wonderful. We are live streaming this to a YouTube program, and so I just wanted to let people know that, because there are many people who like to go back and look at the lyceums after the fact. So without any further ado, I want to introduce Reverend Katie Scudera, who is the minister of First Parish here in Needham, and she and Pastor Willie went to divinity school together. So they've got a long history there. So it's wonderful to have her able to introduce Pastor Willie. So Reverend, and I also would ask people to mute your screen so that we don't have the background noise. That would be great. Okay, Reverend Katie.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amy. And welcome to everyone. I'm Reverend Katie Scudera. I'm the lead minister here at First Parish in Needham, who's hosting this event. As Amy was saying, our Lane Lyceum is carrying on the tradition of New England Lyceums. It's named in honor of the late Reverend Ed Lane, a beloved first parishioner of blessed memory. The Lane Lyceum is a reflection of Ed's lifelong passion for and commitment to civil rights, equal justice, lifelong learning, and spiritual inquiry. For our Lane Lyceum tonight, we are delighted and honored to welcome Pastor Willie Dwayne Francois III to speak about his new book, Silencing White Noise, 6 Practices to Overcome Our Inaction on Race. If you're joining the program without having seen the book, this is, oh, hi, Willie, we're sharing a screen now. It's this book. This incredible book was just published this summer by Brazos Press, and it merges lessons from the academic study of race with Black liberation theology and personal experience, all through Reverend Francois's brilliant writing. Personally, I think I've flagged just about every other page in this book for further reflection or for pull quotes for later for sermons. So thank you, Willie, for that. Tonight, Pastor Willie will discuss the major themes of his book, about how people of all racial backgrounds can overcome silence and inaction on race and advanced racial repair. Reverend Francois has a bachelor's degree from Morehouse College. He's a Morehouse man. I remember learning, he was one of my classmates at Harvard Divinity. And Willie, I remember you and your fellow Morehouse men really showed how historically Black colleges produce some of the most brilliant scholars and thinkers. Thank you for that. And he has a Master of Divinity from Harvard Divinity School. We graduated together in 2012. He is currently the senior pastor at Mount Zion Baptist Church in Pleasantville, New Jersey, and serves in many leadership and ministry roles in his wider community, including through it's New York Seminary. Isn't that the?
Yeah. New York Theological Seminary. Yeah.
Thank you. And so, Willie, I'm going to pass it to you now. As a fellow pandemic parent, which we didn't even know our kids are only 2 months apart. both had the real pleasure of having our first children right at the start of this pandemic. As a fellow pandemic parent, I really could relate to your words in your introduction about how easily white noise can put a child to sleep. My daughter's going to be going to sleep still with some white noise on, so I'm afraid to take it away from her. She's going to be doing that in like 30 minutes. I think it's also a very insightful metaphor for the white noise of dominant American culture that can put us all to sleep and stop us from confronting white supremacy. So I'm delighted that you're here tonight to talk to us about your 6 practices and any other insights that you have to share. So thank you. Thanks, Will.
Thank you so much, Katie, and to
Yeah.
all who made this day possible, who make these experiences possible as regularly as you have them, but signally for inviting me to share and talk about silencing white noise. And yeah, you're right, Katie. We do have the unique scars and the unique joys of pandemic parenthood, of being inaugurated into parenthood during a pandemic. And the white noise machine is so vital. I'm not at home right now, but my son will be going to bed probably in about 30 minutes himself to white noise. But this book is about a more insidious white noise and a more dangerous type of sleep. A more dangerous type of slumber, a socio-political narcolepsy, as one author calls it, that I draw from, and that is this our inability to speak honestly, courageously, and reparatively about race and the way race functions in the United States, and the way religion has become a in many cases willing and oftentimes dangerous companion to racism in the United States. I'm going to share my screen and sort of talk through some things in Zoom pandemic fashion. So I'll just sort of talk through things. Some of it may feel some of it may feel more conversational. Other parts may feel lectury, but that is the nature of how we've gotten through pandemic life. And for some reason I cannot. Just one moment as I struggle to share. Yeah. So what I think lives underneath this book is an opportunity for us across religious traditions, although many of the examples and the critiques are of a type of American Christianity. What I'm hoping that we move toward, this book offers a pathway for, is a spirituality of abolition and reparation, a spirituality that is committed to freedom and also reconstructing the world beyond what we have seen the world to be in our lifetimes. I was wrestling with what type of spirituality lives underneath anti-racism. To do the work of anti-racism itself is exhausting, it's dizzying, and in so many ways, we get it wrong. No matter how wild our good intentions, no matter how invested our hearts in this particular work, it is so easy to find ourselves falling into the very same tropes, very same practices, the very same realities that produce the world that we live in today. It's exhausting work. And that's why I want to think about the work of anti-racism, the work of racial justice as a vocation, as an opportunity for us to respond to the ultimate good that is and that guides the universe, and the work that we do to repair the harm of centuries of racialized trauma, centuries of structural domination, centuries of policy malpractice that leads to this world that we inhabit, that we have no choice but to learn how to coexist in, or we will suffer from co-annihilation. And so as you read these pages, and I'm so excited that many of you all have already started to read through these pages, I hope that what is there is an opportunity for us to think about a spirituality that is committed to the abolition of racism and the repair of human society, particularly the repair of what America is, since this is the land that we occupy. Why did I write this book? I wrote this book so as I am as we're all living in the complicated and exacting throes of COVID-19, I'm living with the particular fatigue of what it means to be locked in, the fatigue of what it means to be confined. And to be confined, early on during the pandemic, there was some analogies that I found myself using around confinement that I think are disingenuous and maybe even insulting to our brothers and sisters who live in confinement to all of us what it has mobility restrict. It may have agency curb. It told that the public was no longer accessible to us. And as I'm wrestling with the fatigue of what it means to be locked, it brought me back to my first justice issue, which is the issue of incarceration. You heard Katie speak to you today about my work that I do at New York Theological Seminary. At New York Theological Seminary, 2 months after I earned my doctorate from Emory in 2020, I was hired to be assistant professor of liberation theology there, but also more specifically to be the director of the Master Professional Studies program. And this program is the oldest master's degree program to exist in an American prison, governed and offered by a theological institution. But currently it is the only master's degree program offered in a New York State prison. And we operate at Sing Sing Correctional Facility. And as of yesterday, after 40 years of existence, we now operate in Bedford Hills Correctional Facility, which is a women's facility. So now we offer graduate education in theology to men at Sing Sing and to women at Bedford Hills. But this sense of confinement reminded me, or it triggered in me a different type of awareness of what our siblings live under and live through in dehumanizing cages that we call centers of rehabilitation. I'm fatigued as I'm writing this book. And so this book also becomes an opportunity for me to have a cathartic experience that does not allow me to hold in some of the social trauma of what it means to be Black in America that I hadn't always found ways to vent outside of Black only spaces, right? So I'm living. So that is a why in this book. The pandemic, which was a reminder of the kinds of pandemics that predated COVID-19. Before COVID-19, we had a public safety pandemic that allowed police officers to live with a type of immunity to accountability. And what happens there? In the middle of in the beginning of the pandemic, we experienced the convergence of the deaths of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, George Floyd. The world was ablaze, particularly the United States urban centers were ablaze with a sense of righteous indignation at the public lynching of George Floyd underneath the knee on a hot street in Minnesota. You have that convergence of death, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, in the middle of a public health crisis. And then as I'm inching toward the middle of writing this work, January 6th happens. And January 6th only underscores how important this work is, but it also gave me one line that I don't dwell terribly long on, but a line in the book where I raised the question about time. Is time running out? This experiment with democracy that so many of us hold to be so long tenured and so sturdy and durable, we saw just how fragile it was as we were literally moments and steps away from losing this experiment because of a mood of cultural insecurity, a mood driven by replacement theory that was undergirded and fueled by both religion and race. Cannot forget the scenes, not just the gruesome scenes of the desecration of the nation's capital, of those chambers, not just the scene of insurrectionists scaling the walls to breach the Capitol, but those scenes not terribly far from those steps that were Christian scenes of Christian iconography, Christian symbols like crosses, Christian symbols like shirts that talked about Jesus and who God hates. January 6th was a moment where we almost lost a piece of our democracy, almost lost some of the integrity of the little democracy that this country has ever really held up to. We almost lost it by a movement or a moment fueled by race and religion. And it reminded me, it caused me to think possibly more clearly than I had before, that if we do not get the racial dynamic right in this country now, time literally may be running out. And then I go back to how Katie started us. I go back to this young boy, this life that is exceedingly vulnerable, this life that is chronically fragile in its current state. In 2020, I have who I call four, Willie, Dwayne, Francois, the four. He's now 2 and 4 months. Born the day before Juneteenth. Juneteenth is the day in Texas that we mark the end of slavery. I'm a native of Galveston, Texas. Juneteenth is a Galveston, Texas holiday, and my son decides to come the day before Juneteenth. I don't know why he couldn't wait 9 more minutes so that he could be a Juneteenth baby, so we can go around calling him a freedom baby, but we bring him into the world, and I stare into his eyes on June 19th, it is June 19th of 2020. I stare into his eyes and I wonder how reckless it might be to continue to bring Black flesh, Black life into a country that has been an organized conspiracy against Black life. I think about white noise and what it does to us so intimately, not because of my own life and my own racialized experiences, but now because of who he is and what he will be and hopefully what he will become in this world. I wonder, will he ever know what it feels like to be thrown up against a police car, even though he's compliant? I wonder if he'll know what it means to be denied admissions into a school because of the color of his skin. I wonder if he'll know what it means to be profiled in a retail store because he doesn't look like the normal customer that one is used to. I raised questions as I stared into his eyes, knowing he knows nothing about the world that we just brought him into, if he will be one of those children who will he be one of those children who is suspended at a higher rate because he is Black, although he does no more disrupting of class than any other racialized child in his class? I wonder if he'll have to live with the untimely, possibly proverbially premature death of his father because Black male life expectancy is still the lowest, is still among the lowest in the industrialized world. These are questions that I asked myself, and these are questions that guided and fueled my pen as I wrote this book. I'm a Christian pastor, and as a Christian pastor, I must always tell the truth. That although my Christianity is very different than so much of the other Christianities that exist in this country, it is hard for me not to think about a spirituality without thinking about my own faith tradition, my own community that attempts to follow a Palestinian carpenter who was executed by his government, but for some reason, this religion has become so allied with whiteness and white power and Americanness and capitalism that it would probably be unrecognizable by that first generation of people who followed the way, that those first persons who are of that early generation that was not allied with Roman power, but were really allied with those who could find themselves in a ditch at any moment. As I think about the toxicity of so much of what is known as American Christianity, and I say this as my own tradition, although I never really call myself a Christian, I only do it in certain contexts. I generally call myself a disciple of the way, a follower of the carpenter. But for easy access, I'm a Christian pastor, and I'm reminded that 15 years before South Carolina seceded from the Union on the question of slavery, the Baptists split. 13 years before South Carolina seceded and the Civil War begins, the Methodist Church splits. A year after maybe 2 years after South Carolina secedes from the Union, the Presbyterian Church splits. The church that is supposed to be dedicated to a Palestinian carpenter born of a teenage mother, lived as a poor itinerant carpenter, one who was housing insecure and often found himself food insecure. A man who was a pup as a child. He was an infant refugee in Africa because of the murderous threats of a puppet politician. People who are supposed to follow a man who was ultimately turned over by a type of mob who had been brainwashed by the structures of power only to protect the power of the powerful, who was later failed by his own criminal justice system, who was ultimately humiliated on a Roman tool of violence and pain and power that we call a cross. People who were supposed to follow this marginalized Jesus split over the question of slavery before the nation split over the question of slavery. And why don't we know any of this? Why is this not taught to us? Why aren't we stunned at understanding just how pernicious the church that is committed to Jesus has been in this country? It is because of white noise. White noise is not unique to Christians. White noise is not even unique to white people. White noise is the racist ideas, speech, silence, misrepresentations that protect and perpetuate white supremacy. White noise, this metaphor, again, Katie brought us into the conversation, is because I placed my son into a bassinet that had a built-in white noise machine. And when he was in that bed, he did not hear the sounds of barking dogs in the living room, a barking dog in the living room, or barking dogs on the streets of Harlem. He did not hear the people on the corner rapping and singing and dancing. Harlem streets are bustling streets. He was not fazed by any of those things because that white noise machine simulated for him something that he was more familiar with than the world he now occupied, and that was the safety of his mother's womb. And how many of us live in a kind of moral infancy related to issues of race, because all of the things that are sounding in our lives, telling us that racism is a relic of the past, telling us that there's nothing we can do about it, telling us that we just need to get over it, all of the things telling us that we need to remain silent because we only make racism worse by talking about it. All of that is white noise, the racist ideas, the speech, the silence, the misrepresentations that protect and perpetuate white supremacy. Now hold this, you heard me say whiteness. You've heard me say white supremacy. I am not using whiteness or white supremacy to refer to skin, to refer to identity, or even to refer to ancestry. Although those things are implicated along the way, I'm talking about whiteness and white supremacy, not as identity, but as ideology, as a type of power, as Michel Foucault would say, that lives and works beneath the consciousness, as a type of power that is governing us when we are not even aware that is governing us. White noise gives me a metaphor for thinking about the way whiteness is at work in all of us, even when we are unwilling participants in it. All of us have been subjected to the the virus, to the noise, the sonic power of white supremacy. It tells us whose lives are valuable. It tells us who can be loved. It tells us who is lovable. It tells us who we can marry. It tells us who we can hire. It tells us who deserves to go to Harvard. It tells us who deserves to go where, who deserves to live where. It tells us who deserves loans. This is all white noise that is sounding all around us. And it is not enough for us to think about racism only in the context of interpersonal or individual acts of discrimination or hate, because the reality is most racism is not violent in the physical sense. In fact, most racism may not even be violent in the emotional sense, in the sense of what we intend, because it is so baked into the fabric of our society. It lives in all of our institutions. It lives in our economic arrangements. It lives among us. It is sounded in our television, sounded in our pulpits, in our religious education spaces, in all of our outlets of media. White noise is coming from everywhere. Everywhere we are consuming and communicating racist ideas, speech, silence, and misrepresentations that protect and perpetuate white supremacy. Eddie Glaude says that white supremacy is so durable, and I think it has been so regenerative that white supremacy, whiteness, no longer needs white people in order for it to exist, in order for it to continue, because it is possible for anti-Black racism to exist in Black minds, to come out of Black mouths, to live in Black bodies. That is just how insidious racism is. And it is that powerful, it is so powerful that we cannot afford to wait. We cannot afford to do nothing. In the book, you'll see that I talk about whiteness as ideology, not identity, as three types of sin. It's idolatrous because it makes whiteness the ultimate concern. It's segregationist because it concentrates power and hoards opportunities in the name of something other than what we are seeing and how we are moving in the world. But it's also demonic in the sense of how Paul Tillich uses the demonic, not in a spiritual sense of some being connected to some Satan or some devilish figure known of the underworld. No, it is demonic in the way that Paul Tillich uses it, that anything that negates or denies human flourishing, human creativity, human love, human freedom is demonic. I like that definition. Anything that negates what it means to be human is demonic. Anything that cuts off human futures and human possibilities is demonic. Anything that denies Black love, Black joy, Black peace, Black hope, Black power is demonic. Whiteness shows up as sin, right? I'm a pastor. I use theological language. As sin because it is idolatrous. It becomes ultimate and we become its acolytes. It determines what the hierarchy of human life is. Segregation is, but it's also demonic because it cuts off entire human communities from the dignity and the promise of what it means to be human. Now, I've spent a lot of time talking about the problem, but if you've read the book, you know the book is really a book about how we embody a solution. What does it mean to abolish racism in our minds and in our system? What does it mean for us to ground and practice repair as a spiritual discipline? So many times, I know the pandemic has been a refrain that I've used a few times here today. I'm going to grab the book really quickly. I know it's a refrain I used a few times here today, but the reality is that in the pandemic, so much of what we were talking about was, we need a recovery. We need the greatest recovery we've ever seen. I'm going to be we heard politicians, I'm leading the greatest recovery ever. We get new politicians who are invested in recovery, but nobody is saying anything about repair. How am I distinguishing that? Recovery was a sense of how do we get back to where we were? Repair, I'm thinking about how do we repair the harm that predated COVID-19? Before COVID-19, Black unemployment was twice as high as white unemployment. Before COVID-19, white high school graduates made more than Black college graduates. Before COVID-19, we experienced a 943 increase in the prison population, largely because of Black and brown bodies for nonviolent drug offenses. Before COVID-19, Black students were being taught one grade level beneath the grade they were actually in. Before COVID-19, if we froze white wealth, and I don't even know how you do that, but if by some cosmic luck, we froze white wealth and white people were not able to earn anything, they were not able, money did not grow at all, it would take 228 years for Black people to earn, work, save, invest, and get a return in order for it to catch up with white wealth. All of that predated COVID-19. So this book is not a call for recovery, nor is it a call for reconciliation. Reconciliation is, oh, can't we all just be one because we're all the same, where it's not possible for us to really lean into a type of oneness, ontological or otherwise, until we've repaired the harms that have been done that have made us so thoroughly divided for so long. This is a book that calls for repair. In fact, it is what I call reparative intercession. What does it mean to be reparative intercessors? I pull this word intercession from my own faith tradition, where we are actually asked to pray for one another, where we are asked to use our prayer energy and our prayer faculties on behalf of someone else. And what this world needs are not just, what the world needs is not just a new opportunity for people of faith to pray, but it's actually time for us to intercede for each other economically, politically, socially, and the like. Reparative intercession is a call for us to act up, show up, and speak up on behalf of those who are more vulnerable than we are. Show up, speak up, and act up on behalf of those who have less power and have less privilege. I talk about reparative intercession in these three frames. It is standing in the tragic gap. It is allowing yourself to occupy a place where you are courageously committed to the idea that you live in between the way things are and the way things can be. Reparative intercessors occupy that place of hope, that place of imagination, that place of creativity, where we are able to say that we are a part of the burgeoning possibilities of love and hope and tenderness and peace in the world. And we willingly stand in between where things are, where we claim we live in a nation of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, but really we live in a nation that is built on stolen land and stolen labor. We stand in that tragic gap between a nation built on kleptocracy and a nation flirting with democracy. A nation that is committed to a politics of exclusion and a heritage of hate, and a nation that is literally committed to the land of the free and the home of the brave. We stand in the tragic gap as reparative intercessors. But we also speak truth to power, what Michel Foucault calls parousia, what I call racial parousia, that we learn how to speak the truth about this nation. Reparative intercession is not bridling your tongue because the truth is uncomfortable for those around you or for yourself, but is also situating daily practices of repair. Stand in the tragic gap, speak truth to power, situate yourself in daily practices of repair. This means that we are not just committed to diversity, not just committed to inclusion. I know we love DEI now. I don't know how many of you all are still working, but you know, DEI is everywhere, and we are so infatuated with the D, diversity, the I, inclusion, but have we really given any attention to the equity dimension of this? I say in the book that diversity is about ask who's present, inclusion asks who's participating, but equity asks who has power. How are we redistributing and sharing power? How are we leveraging our individual and social privileges in ways that allow us to show up, speak up, and act up on behalf of those who are most vulnerable? White noise is everywhere. But that's when we become reparative intercessors, we can turn down the dial and finally shake ourselves free from this slumber. Just before I walk you through those 6 practices, and then we open up for some conversation, I'd love to read one of the more transparent moments of the book for me. It's found on page 16, and it's a lengthier read. I hope that you'll indulge me in this read. Page 16 in my book. I don't know. I have a hard copy. I don't have the paperback with me, but you'll possibly find the word somewhere around there. White noise denies us a chance to live alert and conscious, to embrace a revolutionary realism because we refuse to release the illusions of exceptionalism and greatness we harbor and advance when we cherry pick from history. White noise protects us from the class-based racial nightmare in the United States, which started in the colonial context of stealing Native Americans' lands and Black Africans for labor. White noise persuades Americans that we are all the Christopher Columbuses of the world, free to expand our particular values and innocently discover new places for that expansion. Our national fables coax us into identifying with Columbuses, Winthrops, Washingtons, and Adamses as one nation under God. We forget that so many of us better reflect the experiences of the native people condemned to the treachery of disease and disinheritance. In the comfortable cribs of these illusions, we elect to spotlight the diplomatic genius of a slave-holding rapist like Thomas Jefferson, ignoring the carnage that slavery exacted due to his political hypocrisy concerning the equality of all men. This hazardous slumber facilitates silence on both sides of whiteness as we live in its shadow of death. The inability to converse about race lulls both non-white and white people into an escapist sleep. White noise cancels out Black pain and the truth of America's history of racial terror, allowing us, like my infant son, to sleep through this moment in history, which is so ripe for sincere racial reckoning. The word noise derives from the Latin word nausea, a feeling of uneasiness accompanied by the urge to vomit. In a sense, we move from offices to theaters to sanctuaries to bedrooms, motion sick, vomiting up tragic and potentially fatal untruths about Black and Latinx communities. Unaware of their origins, we spew the ideas and sounds we hear. White noise sounds all around us and sometimes falls from our lips in statements such as these. Black people are equally as racist as white people. White people experience reverse discrimination. America is a post-racial society. If the Jews can make it, how come the Blacks can't? But my family never owned slaves. I'm not a racist. I voted for Obama. I just want the most qualified person to get the job. This is why we Black people can't have nice things. She's so ghetto. That's a hood dude. How are you going to get a job with a name like that? He acts white. You're not like the other Black people. It's not safe there. Where are you really from? They all sound so innocent in the moment. The racialized habits, namely in speech and silence, are the vomit of a subconscious governed by white fear and superiority. On a daily basis, we spew what we consume and experience without asking how we form such opinions and feelings for ourselves and others. My preaching ministry commenced at First Union Baptist Church in Galveston, Texas, one of the oldest independent Black churches in the state. I have many fond memories about the community, that community of faith, which was wildly formative for my childhood and early conceptions of extended family. My maternal grandmother, Mimi, sacrificed for and served this congregation until she died in July of 2017, joining the realm of the ancestors. On many days, the most soaring memories of my grandmother's dignity have First Union as their setting. As a 17-year-old preacher, I delivered many sermons from First Union's pulpit, with my papa in the front row with the deacons and my grandmother at her usher post in the rear. In hindsight, my courage as a public speaker and intellectual crystallized behind that sacred desk. With an affirming congregation of predominantly elderly Black women and my grandparents occupying their respective seats of service and power. All these positive recollections notwithstanding, one memory generates great horror and regret within me. After a rash of gun violence in a local public housing development, I took to the pulpit under the impression that our Black church fancied a sermon that addressed said violence. Ignorant of the statistics confirming the intraracial nature of most violence, I spent part of that sermon railing against gun violence in Black communities as something unique to Black communities. Under the guise of religion and a commitment to Black lives, I lifted the racist theme of Black on Black crime. Dressed in an oversized blue suit and suspenders, I roared, "We need to pull up our pants, finish school, and put the guns down if we want to protect Black communities." The boy preacher in me responded to Black hopelessness and white supremacy manifested in intraracial gun violence by preaching the white noise I had consumed. To the cheers of Black congregants, I pathologized Blackness as inherently violent. I still remember feeling emboldened by the two ministers seated directly behind me and the two sections of the sanctuary choir that flanked the pulpit. I had internalized the idea that those Black men typified what was wrong with Black communities, and I vomited it out on Sunday morning as the good news. There was no need for a white person to spread notions that stereotype and dehumanize Black people that day. My church family needed only to listen to my racist proclamations, detached from any command of how concentrated poverty, racial isolation, and anti-Black ideas operate. I communicated white noise in Black voice and Black sacred space because I trusted the myopic data my white social studies teacher taught me. The detached numbers I had consumed confirmed the biases I formed in my middle-class cocoon. I normalized one of Hollywood's caricatures as if it cast the truest representation of those Black people, Black men and boys trapped in airtight pockets of poverty. Films like Juice and Boys in the Hood, pictures I once said petrified me more than any movie with Freddy Krueger or Michael Myers, stained my worldview and preaching. I consumed and communicated white noise with incalculable consequences for my audience. I was sleepwalking in racism. How do we overcome this in the book? Well, we make repair a part of our politics, but we also make repair a part of our daily lives. I'll say these 6, and then we will open up for some Q&A. Cues to color. That's the first rhythm, these rhythms of reparative intercession. I know the book says practices, but if you've read it, you understand that these aren't a 1, 2, 3 how-to engagement. These are more like processes, what I call rhythms of reparative intercession. They can't be used in a cookie cutter way. They're intended to be experimented with. They're rhythms. It's artistic. You are supposed to adapt them to your life, adapt them to your context, because none of our contexts and none of our lives are the same. 1, cues to color. Embrace difference as a gift. Avoid the idea of I don't see color, because to not see me as a Black man is also not to see what a nation does to somebody with this skin. To not see me as a Black man is also not to name how hard it probably was to be at Harvard and to have a campus security person trail you and ask you for your identity, but not ask any of your white friends that were around you or just ahead of you or just behind you. But when you are able to see color, you're able to see the diversities of the sacred, the diversities of God, right? The diversities of the image of God. Embracing difference allows, as a gift, embracing the divinity of difference. There it is. Embracing the divinity of difference allows us to be honest about where people live and how people are forced to live. And it also gives us a new sense of how we can show up for them. Then we have to have the momentum to encounter. We have to confront the history of whiteness. We cannot live in what I call my middle-class cocoon of innocence. No, we have to be honest that there's a history of the present, that where we live right now comes from somewhere. The MAGA movement comes from somewhere. Mass incarceration comes from somewhere. That you can find the racial wealth gap and why there's so much poverty in Black and brown communities. It comes from somewhere. We have to be able to allow the momentum of that history to push us forward. And there are practices on how to do that you'll find. Each of these have their own rhythms and practices within them that you can find. But we have to be honest about the hard history of this country. Honest about the fact that Dred Scott was denied freedom by a Supreme Court that said that he had no rights that any white man was bound to respect. And by some accounts, there are some that say that the Supreme Court we have now is just as reactionary as the Supreme Court that delivered the Dred Scott case. There's a history of the present that we have to have the stamina to engage. We also need pattern recognition. We have to honor that our lives are interdependent. That literally Du Bois tells us that what will transform this nation is if we can get laboring white people and laboring Black people to come together to see that there is a larger system that is extracting from both of them. I don't know what you saw in Massachusetts, but I know in New Jersey, I saw food lines filled with white people when jobs at the casinos were shut down in Atlantic City. And we didn't get the check soon enough from Donald J. Trump. What I know is that most white people do not have $400 that they could scrape together in the event of an emergency, in spite of how much white wealth exists. In spite of the white middle class, there's still so many scores of our white sisters and brothers who live farther down on the economic ladder than I live. How do we honor our interdependence that all of us are living dominated by some system of subjugation? Pattern recognition allows us to see what Dr. King says, that we are all caught in a single network of mutuality, stitched together in a single garment of destiny. We need a syncopated identity. Learn how to explore our fuller selves. Syncopated identity literally means we learn how to lead intersectional lives, understanding that multiple identities live in this body. It's how you do a power analysis of the self. I'm able to say to myself that yes, I am deprivileged because of my race as a Black person, but I am privileged because of my class status. I am privileged because of my gender. I am privileged because of how I identify sexually. I am privileged because of my American citizenship. I am privileged because I live in a nation that pretends to be a Christian nation, and I'm a Christian, right? All of those that you heard, all of those privileges that this Black man carries into the world, and my Black identity as oppressed does not negate those privileges that I carry. And so as somebody who is exploring his fullest self or fuller self, I figure out, how do I use my privileges, gender, class, sexuality, religious, citizenship, on behalf of those who are vulnerable? How do I use all of those privileges to show up, speak up, and act up on behalf of those who do not have those privileges, like Black women, like Black trans women, like Latinx trans persons, right? How do I begin to use my power and privilege, understanding my syncopated identity, to do that work? And then we have to have the pulse to risk, where we sacrifice our power and privilege as an act of holiness. It's in that chapter, chapter 5, I think it is. It's in chapter 5 that I start articulating an abolitionist spirituality, at least a sketch on what abolitionist spirituality can be, a spirituality that I find in how I read Jesus, but also one that I think has vitality and vibrancy across religious traditions. And then we have to have downbeat truth. We have to be able to tell on ourselves. How do we name our complicity in racism and live with the discomfort as an opportunity for us to advance racial justice and not retreat from racial justice? Downbeat truth is hard because you have to tell on yourself. You have to be willing to say that, yes, I may be a part of the anti-racist choir, but I need rehearsal every now and then. It is your way of saying to yourself, that was racist. I don't know why I said that. That doesn't represent my heart, but it was racist. And it was offensive to someone. Having to ask myself, in the chapter where I talk about syncopated identity, I use the standard chart around microaggressions, and I add is it 2 or 3? I add 3 different columns to it of how to respond to microaggressions. Naming it as a type of sin, talking about what message that it communicates theologically or spiritually, but also how can I respond to it, right? We have to be honest about the ways we perpetuate microaggressions. the ways that I may see a group of young Black men wearing hoodies coming my way, and my mind signals something that I don't know it's signaling. Telling on yourself says that just because nobody else knows that I thought it does not mean I got away with it or I should get away with it. I have to hold myself accountable. Only you know what traverses your mind. Only you know how you truly feel about the parents of your interracial grandchildren and interracial nephews, right? Only you know how you feel about your non-white spouse who you love so much, but still have moments about their family that you just don't understand. Only you know how you feel about Black and brown students who sleep through class and you have no idea what their home life is like. Right? Downbeat truth says, I gotta tell on myself, because if I do not, I'm just perpetuating everything that is wrong in this world. And so I'll pause there, but that is the work that I hope you will accept an invitation to take, to explore, to journey, because time is running out. This democracy is as fragile as it has ever been. Racial dynamics are so combustible right now. American religions are dominated by the ones who are the most conservative of us, and the rest of us get a bad rap about what that looks like and feels like. Time is running out, and we have an opportunity to do something about race that will allow us to coexist. Otherwise, we're on the brink of co-extinction. Thank you. I don't know who's facilitating questions. Maybe Katie, if you want to come back and facilitate questions.
Oh, I've just been asked to unmute. Apparently I am facilitating questions. Is that right, Amy?
Reverend Katie.
Hello, Pastor Willie. Thank you so much for this incredible summary of your book and all of your work. I just deeply appreciate it. I'm so glad that you're with us tonight. I guess that I'm curious. Oh, hi, Peter. Okay, so I think that what we can do is have folks either do that raise hand function that's on Zoom. I'm not going to see you if you're doing this because there's a lot of you, which is great. So use your raise hand function, or you can type something into the chat. And we're going to do our best to not be here forever, not repeat ourselves.
And if I may add a quick note.
Oh, thank you, Sarah Elizabeth.
Just so that everyone remembers, this is still we are keeping the question and answer portion on the live stream on YouTube, because this is a very important part of this talk, and we're so grateful to have even more of Pastor Willie's wisdom. But I just want to make sure people are still aware of that fact, because I know different people have different feelings about being shared in public spaces like that. So just wanted to note it for everyone. Thank you.
Yeah, that might actually help then. If you would like for your name to not be attached to whatever question you have for Pastor Willie, you could put it in the chat so all of us know in the Zoom. But the internet, all of YouTube doesn't necessarily have to know. I can just read it aloud. You just let me know. All right, Peter, I think that we're going to start with you.
You can also send messages directly to you.
Oh, that's true.
That you'll see them and no one else will. You know, people trust their minister. So
that's true, to not embarrass them publicly. I don't know.
Confidences, yeah.
Can they trust me on that in this case? We'll find out. We'll find out together. Peter.
I think Reverend Katie would need to be added as a co-host for that.
Oh. I guess Amy or Sarah Elizabeth, if you want to add me as a co-host, I'm happy to. Oh, I'm a co-host now. Anyone can message.
There we go. Perfect.
All right, Peter.
May I address you as Pastor Willie? Okay. Pastor Willie, as in that last portion, you were talking about telling on yourself. I had a thought and I wanted to share it and ask how you feel it works with that or doesn't. And what I was thinking about is how a lot of the time, part of me wants to run away from negative feelings and, scary thoughts. And one thought I've thought of that I think can remind me that, it's okay, is, quote, my best is more me than my worst is. So I'm wondering, do you think that sort of reminder that I'm catching myself in this? I'm telling on myself, I'm noticing that the white noise I've heard has led me to this reaction, and that I'm noticing and thinking about it. I can give myself credit for that at the same time as I think about how do I catch myself and prevent and deal with it.
Yeah, I think that we all need those types of hacks that disallow us from the retreat. It's so easy to take the escape hatch when those feelings bubble for us. And I think not only do I think we need the hack, I think that what you said is theologically true for me. That's how I lead in my anti-incarceration work as an abolitionist. Is none of us are reducible to our worst thoughts or our worst actions. I am as somebody who is a type of personalist. I do believe in the fundamental good of the person. I do believe, and for me, I talk about that as the Imago Dei. Is that to be created in the image of God means that eternity stuff is in us. That's what grounds us. I had to put Paul on the shelf. Paul, the biblical writer. Because there are certain things about humanity that I don't hold to be true. I do believe in the inherent good of humanity. I do not believe that white people or any person is inherently racist. I think we inherit racist ideas and thoughts, but we are all essentially good, ontologically good to our core, and the world does this work on us in a particular way. And so I think that, yes, we all need to find ways of self-encouragement, but we also need those types of theologies, Peter, that says, no, human being and human becoming is sacred within itself. Right? Whether I connected to a religious tradition or not, that human person is sacred. Whether they believe like me or think like me, that person is sacred, right? So in addition to telling it to ourselves, we must also tell ourselves it about the other, right? I talk in there in the book, I use the theory of Emmanuel Levinas to talk about what it means to encounter God. The divine is to encounter divine. The divine is to stare at the face of the other, to behold the face of the one or the ones who are not like me, who are distinct from who I am. That is how we become color conscious, right? That is how we allow ourselves to experience the holy and the sacred. Now is by seeing that divinity in the face of the other. There's a preacher who is now in sainted memory. His name was Mac King Carter. Mac King Carter grew up in the South, and he was in grade school, went to a pretty sophisticated Catholic school. One of the only Black students in his class. Mac King Carter had a teacher that taught philosophy, right? Nobody gets philosophy in primary and secondary education these days, right? He's in the philosophy class. And his teacher gives him an assignment, bring me a picture of what God looks like. And all the students brought pictures of what God looks like. And most of them brought pictures of God that looked like them. Most of them older white people. Matt King Carter puts his picture on the table, and the teacher looks at it. The teacher falls into his chair, at least the way Matt King Carter tells it, and starts to weep because of the image of God that he brought in. Right? It was an offensive image of God. It was an outrageous image of God. You know what picture he brought that he said, this is what God looks like? It was a picture of Emmett Till in his casket at his funeral in Chicago. The disfigured, brutalized face of Emmett Till is how he said he thinks about God's presence. He thinks about God's face, right? When we learn how to see the divine, the sacred, the holy, the good, the valuable in the face of that which is wholly not like us, without allowing it to contaminate how we understand our own value, we're in the right direction.
Thank you, Pastor Willie. That as a Unitarian Universalist minister, and there's a lot of UUs on the call now, I can really resonate with that whole theological bit about the inherent worth and dignity of every person. It's a challenge for ourselves to see it in ourselves. I think, did I just say this on Sunday? It's possible. I think about that, the story from Jesus, our carpenter friend, our prophet friend, who talks about how the greatest commandment is to love your neighbor as yourself. So you both actually have to love yourself if you're going to love your neighbor well.
Sure.
But you also do actually at some point have to love your neighbor. And it's because even with all the muck of the world and the negative influence and nurture that can happen on earth because of these systems of oppression that are on each of us, that in essence, people are born good. There's the seeds of goodness in every person. And we hope that we can build a society where those seeds of goodness are actually watered for inside every soul. It's so thank you for that lovely moment of ecumenism right there between our faith traditions. No, I'm curious too, if there right now I don't have any questions in the chat. I don't have any other hands raised. We still have like 15-20 minutes of Pastor Willie's time. If you want to ask him things about the book, this is the time to do it.
I would love to ask something. I can't figure out the hand thing at this moment. I'm a little tapped out in that regard, even as the tech team.
Yeah.
But I'm Sarah Elizabeth. I'm the religious educator at First Parish. I'm happy to identify myself. And I want to say I'm going to invoke the classic UU proverb for the first half of what I have to say of, this is more of a comment than a question. But your story about the face of God, of the divine, hit me so powerfully because I'm in the position where many times I have led our coming of age class, which is essentially the UU equivalent to confirmation. And part of that confirmation sort of process, that coming of age process, there's an activity where they're invited to draw a picture of God as they have been taught to see God. And you get a lot of like very, white man with a long beard, robes, etc. But there was one group that just decided to not follow the instructions and drew God as a dog. And I was really, captivated by that. And sort of inspired, sort of like, this is my train of thought, right? Like thinking about those things that were both so beautiful in their own different ways that hit emotionally different. I wonder what it means to imagine a different way of being, and what does it mean to balance knowing what our history is, knowing what our current is, what our present is, but also imagining a new future. Because I think sometimes it's hard. I think so many people look to the past or look to the future, but have a hard time balancing both. And I put myself in that category no matter how hard I try. So I'm really curious about in the context of your book, what it means to hold past and future, reality and possibility.
Yeah, I think that is the art of the reparative intercessor, the one who stands in the tragic gap, to use Parker Palmer's language again, right? One who stands in the tragic gap, is that I have no choice but to look at the world the way it is. But I have to be honest about how the world got here. It didn't show up this way ready-made. No, this is a world we made. This is a world we developed. This is a world we've earned to some degree. Now, how do we earn the world that we want? How do we earn the, and honestly, there's some people who want the world the way it is, right? In fact, I mean, we had whole political campaigns around wanting to take the world back from where it is right now, right? Or particularly a country back. But this idea as a reparative intercessor, we hold the tension of one thing that is so brilliant about memory or rememory, as Toni Morrison says, is that it allows us to treat remembering as a spiritual practice within itself. To tell the hard history of how this present emerged, we can see that as a spiritual discipline or as a moral discipline. We can see it as a practice of self-formation and community formation, right? To stand in the tragic gap is to live in between where things are, and to do that, you have to be able to trace how we got there. In the book, I talk about this as legacy locating. How do we locate the legacy of those heinous events of the past? But then in chapter 5, chapter 5, right? It's late, guys. I talk about this need for imagination. Abolition within itself is an act of faith. To do justice work within itself is an act of faith. Why? Because we are believing a world can exist in spite of the fact that we've never seen it. For some reason, I believe we can live in a world without poverty. Some reason I believe we can live in a world without prisons. I believe we can live in a world without racism. I believe these things, although I've never seen. My experiences have only disabused me of such ideas. But it is the art of imagination that we are called to practice as well, that we don't depend on reflection, but we now allow ourselves to use different type of neural triggers, that we can foresee a world that has never existed before, and not foresee a world that's never existed. I say this as a Christian pastor, in the sweet by and by, because that is so much of how we are sedated into accepting what this world is that, Jesus is going to come back. And when Jesus comes back, Jesus is going to make things better. Or when I die, I'll experience something that is better than what I'm experiencing. No. That we tell ourselves we got ourselves here, even if it wasn't us, right? We are beneficiaries of people who got us to this point, right? Ancestors who contributed to the present in some ways, that we're honest about how we got here, but we don't allow the honesty of how we got here to stop our abolitionist imagination. Our belief that we can, that I talk about as a counter, we need a daily counter imagination that we hold in tandem. But we also have this counter imagination that is working towards something better, working toward something more sustainable, working towards something more democratic, working towards something more human.
Great. We do have a question in the chat. As a Christian pastor, how do you understand the attraction of fundamentalist Christian churches that seem to ignore the carpenter?
Yeah. I think, that's a really hard question. Something about Christian fundamentalism, it is not committed. Christian fundamentalism is anti-structural. It sees the world in individual terms. So to use the idea of institutional racism doesn't make sense, because for them, institutions can't be racist, only people can be racist. And look, we've gotten rid of all the races, right? So there's an anti-structuralist dimension to fundamentalism because there's such a heavy commitment on personal piety, right? What am I doing? How am I showing up? Do I have a relationship with Jesus? Someone. Number two, it is almost exclusively otherworldly. I was just talking about that a moment ago. to be promised an eternal resting place where no more crying, no more sickness, no more loneliness, no more all of the laundry list of things that we hate about this present world. I can see that how that is an opioid of such. It feeds into a part of us that is longing for something better, but we don't want to do the work to make something better, right? And companion to that, I'll say a third thing is that there's not a lot of responsibility connected to fundamentalism. The extent of work connected to fundamentalism is, am I tithing to the pastor in the right way? And yes, to the pastor. Do I go to church enough? Am I reading my Bible? None of those things actually communicate the demands of the carpenter, as Reverend Katie says, to love, and love in a hard way. Love in a way that is costly. Love in a way that causes you to do that pulse to risk, sacrificing your power and privilege as an act of service. It's responsibility, accountability free in so many ways. Another dimension of this that I would say, it's attractive because it's highly performative. So many of the fundamentalist groups, I'm cautious not to reduce fundamentalism to white evangelicalism, although they walk hand in step in so many ways. And let's not even talk about the way Christian nationalism has shown up as its own faith tradition, but white evangelicalism looks cool in a lot of ways. Skinny jeans, lattes on the lectern, PowerPoint, smoke machines. For baptisms, you have big winding pools into big winding slides into a pool. It looks fun, right? Because there's a type of cosmetic. Yeah, there's a cosmetic progressivism to white evangelicalism, while it is still cosmologically oppressive and slave-holding religion, right? Conceptually, it's slave-holding religion, but cosmetically, man, it looks like somebody you would, want to hang with. Somebody when we were in seminary, Katie, we probably wouldn't have mind having a glass of wine with, or maybe going to Thirsty Scholar and having a drink with, right? They look like that, right? They give you a hippie look that you can, it's alluring because it looks cool too. It looks cool too. And maybe the last thing I'll say is it's so allied with power. People want to be powerful, and people want to know powerful people,
I love that difference between the cosmetic and the cosmology. It's excellent.
Okay.
Oh, I have. Oh,
Can I jump in?
Yes. Oh, do you have a question, Amy?
I do have a question.
Okay.
We're faced with an election coming up very soon. We're faced with a very divided country, and we've got Thanksgiving and Christmas coming up, where we're going to see relatives who we can't talk to. A person I know said, she just said awful things about Mexicans, she didn't say it to me. She said it to my daughter, who blew up at her. And that didn't, I don't know that she heard what my daughter had to say, because my daughter was so frustrated. But how do we have conversations when people are spouting these stereotypes and Fox News, information that, how do we move forward? And I liked your whole idea of being neighborly and seeing God in each other. How do we do that with people who are very hard to do that with? Let me say it that way.
Yeah, it's not easy because sometimes those persons represent an affront to everything you hold to be true. And then the other times, these are also people you love. And you want to say, how did we come from the same womb? How did we grow up in the same household? Were we really this close in college? Like I can't imagine thinking like this, right? And so it requires a type of reading the moment. When I talk about the work of the momentum to encounter, one of the things I acknowledge in there is that it requires communal discernment. Right, this is not work that happens in isolation. Right? This is work that we must do in community because none of us age out of racism. None of us just wake up non-racist one day because we didn't wake up racist one day. Uh, we have to tell ourselves that we are on a lifelong journey of helping people see where they need to grow in this space. And sometimes it requires the kind of biting criticism that is sharp, that says, no, Willie, that's racist. And let me tell you why that's racist, right? And then other times it may require a little more finesse. You know, it may require, listen, I heard what you said last week, and here's an article that maybe you should read. Here's a YouTube video that I was scrolling on TikTok and I ran across this video and what do you think about this video? And they may give you a response to it. And then you could say, well, now, how does this match with what you said a few weeks ago? Do you see that sometimes you have to be biting and sharp and in the moment, and other times you have to find more strategic ways to do it. And I particularly say that to non-white people because it is not always safe to call out racism. You can lose your job, you can lose your life in a lot of ways. So there has to be levels of strategy on how you do it because you want to be safe. And, Christmas is coming around and, you also don't want to let one person deteriorate that familial communal moment for you. And so being intentional about how you do that is important. You have an obligation to say something as a human being. You have an obligation to say something as someone who is an accomplice to racial justice, who is also working to get as close to that paradigm of anti-racism as possible. So you have an obligation to say something, but it's a matter of figuring out how do I read this moment? How do I read this room? And there's no one moment that can do it. But sometimes it requires a biting now response, and other times you look for the resources that are pithy enough, that are concise enough, that can at least open up the conversation. If you know you can't do it in that moment, you find ways to enter the conversation. Then you can say, you remember on Christmas evening when you said blah, blah, blah? I was just wondering, how can you agree with this video, but also say what you said, right? Those types of things are important. Another way of doing this, Amy, is to tell on yourself. It's to say, I remember when I was, I'll talk about this in the book, that a moment that haunted me for years is when I'm in school, when I'm a child, but I'm hanging out with one of my Latinx. We're hanging out at the table, non-white table, have a Latinx friend. We have a lunch lady who's also Latinx, and she gives us free juice. And I call her Mexican. And I think I said it like that. I said a Mexican. I think I said it like that. And my friend says, no, she's not Mexican, and corrects me. And as a child, I say, well, what's the difference, right? Because at some point, someone told me that there was no real diversity within Latinx life, or there was no diversity, or everybody was Mexican. And somebody also probably told me that they were all illegal, right? Like I got that as a child, I got that from somewhere. And just because I did it as a child does not let the community that formed me, whether that was in the home, whether it was at church, or whether it's at school, or whether it was on the street, it doesn't let them off the hook for passing that crap on the children, right? So you know, not, my story may be a little more innocent because I was a child when I did it, but being able to tell a story on your own racism and how you did the work or continue to do the work to beat back those assumptions that just find their way into your consciousness is also a way to disarm folk, because that's what you want to do. You want to disarm people so they can hear you.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think that the practices that you give in this book do help with giving us ideas for those little pithy statements. What might I say? What stories could I tell if I'm in a difficult position? I told folks in the congregation that at a Needham event recently, I was asked to give a land acknowledgement, and I gave a landed enslavement acknowledgement, and a woman came to me afterwards to tell me she thought that the word she used was disgusting. She repeated it 2 or 3 times. Like, it was disgusting that you said those things. And I was in such shock about it that I was just like, what? Seriously? You thought, what? I was not articulate. I couldn't go anywhere with it, but I just kept saying it. I was like, what did you think was disgusting? I was like, I just spoke a historical fact. And she was very upset. Then she left. And I was like, oh, of course, in retrospect, I was like, I had a lot of things I could have said to that woman. But I think that all of us get tripped up when somebody says something we're not expecting that is, in that case, I was like, wow, that is deeply racist. I don't even know how to talk to this woman. And what we can do is practice amongst ourselves and in our families in safer spaces where we know the other person's not going to get furious with us. And that will help us as we encounter other folks out in the world. And I do want to get to, it's 9 o'clock, but I do want to get to, there was a comment and a question in the chat that I want to make sure I shared. One of them was just a thank you, Willie, from one of our members. Thank you for talking with us. I share a birth date with your son. I need lots of rehearsing with the choir. I guess that on this theme, getting to practice together. I have cousins who have not joined the choir and would want to abolish the choir. So I'm considering buying copies of your book to give them. And for all of you out there, if you haven't bought,
please do that.
Yeah, please do that. Like, yeah. So support this first-time author in his work. Okay. And the question was, would Pastor Willie talk about the aspect of white people sacrificing power, prestige, and specifically divestment, transfer of wealth? What are his suggestions for those who are white in this audience about the importance and process of divestment and redistribution of wealth?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredibly important. You know, that's one of my calls for so many American Christian denominations, right? Is to redistribute this wealth. So much of it has been connected to the legacy of slavery, right? Or at least connected, or the legacy of Jim Crow wage theft. I mean, discrimination in the markets is real. So I think that is a type of reparations that could be helpful in some ways. But I do think that there are phenomenal Black-run organizations and institutions that could be beneficiaries of your network and beneficiaries of your financial contributions, sizable financial contributions that can make a world of difference. There's so many Black-led organizations that are doing the work of systemic change and the abolition of white supremacy that, you know, that is a viable way forward. I think that is one of the harder ways of thinking about how we use our power and privilege. You know, getting people to start by saying, yo, I probably got this job because I'm white. I'm pretty sure I was hired because I was a white man. You know, to be able to say that is powerful. Like, we say the opposite, like, affirmative action, affirmative action, you know. But how often do we say, you know, I probably, you know, made it through college on subpar grades because I was white, you know? Most people are poor students, right? I mean, let's just be honest. This is not the smartest country in the world. Most of us are poor students. And, you know, most of us get through college on C's. And some people can't sustain C averages. And you know, you get a C average, you lose scholarships and things like that. You know, that wealth disparity matters. That if I am on C's and I lose and I don't have scholarship, but I still have family and trust that can pay, and I'm a Black student who's, you know, not necessarily a good student either. I don't have that to lean on. Like, I graduated, you know, I probably graduated with a mediocre record because I'm white. Like, that kind of acknowledgement of privilege is important, right? To make a case that says, yo, I'm going to actually use my voice to amplify issues connected to Asian communities, right? The issues connected to South Korean communities, right? Issues connected to Filipino communities. Like, to be able to say that I'm going to use my voice and I'm going to use my power to do some of that, I think is those are the easier ways to start thinking about it. But yeah, if you have wealth that you can redistribute, you know, we welcome it. We welcome it.
No. Well, I'm thinking about, you know, that you and I were over at Harvard, and the affirmative action for white students through legacy is a huge thing at the Ivy League schools. Even thinking about our blessed alma mater at Harvard Divinity School, bless them. They're always sending me information about how to donate to them, and I very much appreciate my time there. But I know they don't need my money. Like, I absolutely know Harvard University does not need my money. And so what we think about, instead of you know, tithing directly to some other pastor, or giving money to Harvard Divinity, as Willie knows, I married one of our classmates, so we're a double Harvard Divinity household here. We don't give them any money. Instead of giving money in those places, we think about, well, what if we were tithing to not just our local church at First Parish? What if we split that tithe into places that really needed it? Because Harvard does not need our money, but other places, small organizations, the kind of donations we can make makes a huge difference. To give regular, like $25, $50 donations a month before we're able to get to a more systemic redistribution of wealth. Those of us who have money to spare, that we can think about tithing our income, that is actually a great way to live into anti-racist practice.
Yeah. It is.
Let's see. Okay. Janet, I see you have a question there. It's one of our UU Christians. I want to give you a moment, but then I think we do have to wrap up because now it's past 9 o'clock.
Yeah, I just needed to chime in here because I have two organizations that I want to recommend that I feel really strongly would answer this question. Hamilton Garrett Center for Arts and Music. They are here in Boston and accept mostly scholarship kids in arts and music, and they have a very good reputation for sending kids on to Berklee School of Music. And what they suggest, there are churches now that do this Negro Spiritual Project. I don't know if you've heard of it, where when congregations sing hymns that were written during the slave era, because those people never got royalties, they put aside some money and it goes to scholarships for this inner city arts and music center, Hamilton Garrett. So I think that's just like an obvious choice to send money back where it should have gone, and it in present day, you know, educates these young people. The other one that I really love is called Freedom Reads, and I don't know if you've heard of it. It sends they have libraries in prisons all over the country, and I think the fellow's name is Dwayne Betts. But look it up. It's a fabulous organization, and their board is terrific. Freedom Reads, it is called. And he was a 16-year-old, I think, that was incarcerated for stealing a car and was in isolation, and somebody slipped a book of poetry under the door, and he said it saved his life. And then, you know, after he was incarcerated for 10 years or so, somehow he made his way to Yale Law School, and now he does this prison library project that is really powerful, you know, about reading is power. So that's another way to really address present day, you know, carceral state. So I recommend those two.
Yeah, thank you, Janet. And thank you, Becky and Peter, for putting some links into the chat. No.
Thank you, Reginald Dwayne Betts. Thank you.
Yeah, that's well, and I know that we need to be wrapping up, but actually, Janet, I'm thinking of a question for Willie. You know, that I wonder, for the folks who are still with us on the call, are going to watch on YouTube. The whole time I've known you've been a great scholar. Here you are, just, you know, quoting Foucault, whatever, you know, just off the top of your head. I'm curious, for the folks on this call, what would you say are some beyond, like, they've read your book, then who might they go to next to think about that, to dig into some of the primary sources that you've been drawing from for Black liberation theology, for academic theories of race, philosophy, as you were talking about earlier? I'm curious if you have like a top three that people could take home and be like, oh yeah, I'll try to look them up. Don't say Kant. You see anybody else?
Good. I think, you know, Ibram Kendi has such phenomenal work. So anything that Ibram has produced is important to read. I think in the realm of theology, Kelly Brown Douglas has a phenomenal book entitled Resurrection. I can't remember the full name. It's a new book. Just read it. But yeah, Stand Your Ground is also it's a staple for classes I teach. But her new book around resurrection, these resurrection politics. I can't remember the name of it. But Kelly Brown Douglas's new book is one that is that could be really useful for us. And you know, there's still, you know, folks like Tommy Shelby, who is a philosopher who's there in Harvard, who helps think through these things in very dense ways. So and you know, James Baldwin, man, keep reading James Baldwin, and I mean, he has been so formative for how I understand myself as a writer and how I understand myself as a person of faith. Comes from James Baldwin. So yeah, that would be a list.
All right, thank you, Willie. Yeah, Amy, are you going to be wrapping us up today?
Yes, I will. You know, I can't thank you enough, Pastor Willie. It's just been an absolutely, just a marvelous 2 hours. I can't believe the time has just flown by, because you have just such a way with language and a way with ideas, and you've just given us so much to think about. And it's just been a great way to start the Lane Lyceum for this year. You know, I don't know that we can top this, but we'll try. So thank you so much for being